viewing live.
Yeah.
But it's not like on Facebook.
Yep.
And we'll be able to see them when they come in because it's a meeting.
Okay, that's what I was going to ask, if will we be able to see them? So
Yeah.
like the Paulie Murray class.
Exactly. So we have 4 folks right now. Maybe we'll give it one more minute. And then.
So tomorrow, what's the color scheme tomorrow? Or is the whole week black? I'm just wondering. Because
Yeah, let's see. I determine that, you know.
I can imagine.
No, I pulled this black shirt out because I was running late and I didn't have to iron it.
All right.
You still iron? I don't iron anything.
Typically, I don't. I was just trying to sound good. I don't iron, I don't cook. They say housework won't kill you, but why take the chance?
That's how I feel about what's it called? Exercise. And you know, there's been way too many people dying while they're exercising. I'm like, I'm okay.
You sound like my sister.
Okay. So we have 6 folks. We'll let them in and then we'll get started in like the next minute or so.
Fun.
All right, welcome everyone to ReUnion 2021 and our 3:30 session with the Very Reverend Dr. Kelly Brown Douglas and Dr. Sandra Montez. Today's session is just a talk back, a conversation between both Dean Kelly and Dr. Montez. You know, they're going to be discussing some of the work that Kelly has been doing in the public square with EDS at Union, with the Union community. And then we'll open it up to questions. Folks, if you can use the chat feature for questions, the first 20 minutes or so will just be a facilitated conversation between Dr. Montez and Dean Douglas, and then we'll open it up to questions. So folks can use the reaction button and raise your hand when we get to that section, and we'll bring people up. We can unmute folks. They can ask a question to the individuals. And then we can kind of go from there. If don't want to get in the way of the conversation, so I'm going to pass it over to Dr. Sandra Montez, and she can get us started with our conversation with Dean Kelly Brown Douglas.
Thank you so much, Ian, and so glad that y'all are here with us today. I'm very grateful and excited to be asking some questions to our Dean Kelly Brown Douglas. One of the things that I have enjoyed a lot during this pandemic time, which is, I guess, maybe kind of weird to say, right? I'm enjoying this out of the pandemic, but you have been doing with EDS at Union, Dean Douglas, these Facebook live conversations called Just Conversations. And today's, I don't know if y'all know about these, but if you don't, please go to the EDS at Union Facebook page. And they're about 2 to 3 a month, I believe. And today's is, as usual, a must see. Dean Douglas spoke with Alicia Garza, and it was incredible. One of the things that y'all started with, though, which I really, really loved, is how you started asking her about the organizing part of her work, especially building relationships. Could you please talk a little bit about that from your own perspective, Dean Douglas?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Sandra D. Montez. Thank you very much. And thank you all for joining us, and welcome back to Union, even if it is virtual. And I too am a Union alum, so it's always good to be in the space with other Union alums. Yeah, our Just Conversations and that I just had with Alicia Garza, and many of you will know her. I'm familiar with her name, as she was one of the 3 women who launched it, Black Lives Matter. And so with Opal Tomet, as well as Patrisse Cullors, and she continues, builds on that work, as she says, moving from protests to politics, from protests to a movement, and central to that is organizing. And what I liked, Sandra, in the discussion of organizing and her book, and she has a book called, oh, now I can't think of the name of the book, but it will, I'll bring it back to myself. But she has a book in which she talks about this. And one of the things that I like about it, and particularly for a community like ours that are preparing students for ministry and whatever forms of ministry that will take, that she reminds us that organizing is messy work, right? It's not the glamorous work, first of all, and that the power of a movement is not simply found in the glamorous, but it's the behind the scenes work of organizing, building coalitions, and as she said, partnering with those people who have common concern and common vision. And then building from there, because what she reminds us is that you can't make any change without coalitions, without partnership, with this kind of organizing. And I think that that's what, as we make these transitions from seminary into ministry, and if we want our ministries, as we like to say, make a difference, and to make a difference and to be transformative, I think that that is something that we can carry on into our ministry. And so that's what I liked about it. And she really develops that, but that's why I started with this whole thing of organizing, because we think of change as simply the glamour that we see, right? And no, that's not where real change, substantive change takes place.
Thank you, Dean. And the book's name is The Purpose of Power, How We Come Together When We Fall Apart. And another thing that she talks about that I have been thinking about a lot is the difference between surviving and thriving. And what do you think about that, Dean Douglas? 'Cause I know she talked about it, but I would love to get your take on what that means to you.
Yeah, you know, it reminds me of something that Pauli Murray, first Black female priest in the Episcopal Church, said once when she was, I believe, maybe testifying before Congress, or at least in a public address that she gave. She said, for any Black woman to be able to say, I survived, is a statement of resistance. Because it means that you have survived under social, cultural conditions that have meant your death, not your life, that have tried to foster your death, not your life. And that survival itself is almost a political act. But life is about more than simply surviving. Life's about flourishing. And the reality is that far too many people are trapped in conditions in which survival is difficult, that we have to talk about survival as a political act. What? That we have to talk about it that way tells us something that lets us know deeply that there's something wrong with the world, and there's something wrong with the people that have been able to accept the reality that for some people, survival itself is a statement. We shouldn't have to fight to survive. What we should be doing is creating the kind of conditions in which people can thrive. And so I believe that creating those conditions in which people can thrive and live into the best of what they were created to be, that's our call. Right. And so that's what I even hear, because that's the work that Alicia Garza and others do. That should be the call of faith communities. That's the call of the church and religions, that we create the conditions into which people can flourish and live into the sacred beings that they were created to be. And so to me, yes, survival is important, but it ain't enough. And that we have to even talk about survival and how, wow, survival itself is an act of resistance. That's a statement about who we are in the world we have created. And it is also a statement about who we are as people who claim to be committed to ministry and faith leaders, because this has happened on our watch, and that should never be, that people can say, I survived, should never be, never be some kind of political statement. Even when we think of, I'm thinking, you mentioned, Sandra, the pandemic, and I'm thinking of this pandemic and COVID, and man, if you think this time last year, I remember very clearly, I was very scared because they were predicting at that point just 80,000 lives being lost. And I thought, wow, that's a lot of lives. And I hope I not in that number, and people I love aren't in that number. 80,000. Now we would have prayed for just 80,000, 500,000, over 500,000 people have succumbed. And then others of us can say, we survived, and feel good about that. But we can't feel good about that, because it should have never gotten to the point where we celebrate that we survived. We have to create the kind of world where to say we survived isn't a statement of celebration. I probably didn't answer your question, but.
No, you did. No, I totally, that's exactly what I feel too. A lot of times I remember Dr. Catherine Meeks, when she was asked, why aren't there many more Black theologians and Black people, writing books, especially in the Episcopal Church? And she said, well, we're trying to survive.
All right.
I mean, once we get to that survival and we can actually get to the thriving, and that's one of the things that Alicia was talking about too, right? About focusing on Black-led organizations, focusing on helping Black-led companies, et cetera, to thrive. And I really was moved when you said that. It brought tears to your eyes when I was talking about Black futures, and I believe it's Jeremiah where it says, God has this plan for us and a future for us. And yet I think that a lot of people, especially Black people in this country, don't get to see that.
Right.
And you were talking about also, you mentioned how all of this awful racism, et cetera, that is existing outside of our walls is now coming into our walls. And so if you would just touch a little bit on that, how does that feel to you, being at Union? And when we have these visions of Union and then something like this happens in our walls, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, Union's in the world, and the world is inside of Union, right? And so we can't, we can't act as if Union or any place is a bubble, because when we do that, we stop responding to the world, and we stop living into what we're called to, which is creating a more just world. And that starts with creating that within our own little, I always like to say, our own little corner of the garden into which we have been given to live. Right? To just start there, just start there. And so I think what this means for us, when we see the sort of the ways in which Union reflects the world, and all of its uh, uh, goodness, and all of its evil, in so many ways. And when we have sort of these reminders, as we have this week, what it should be, and I'll get to the trauma, but what it should be for us is an opportunity, if you will, for a lack of a better word, to look and take stock, right? And to say, okay, who are we? What does it say about who we are? Even in how we respond to it, what does that say about who we are? And so it reminds us, that we still, and I hate this term, got a long way to go, but it reminds us that we, as in the people, we aren't in some bubble as if we don't reflect the privileges and the evils of the world in some way. And it reminds us, I like to call it, we talk, since we're talking to union alums, we know these words, kenosis and all that, and self-emptying and all that. I like to call it a crucifying kenosis. What are the ways in which we have in fact been a part of a crucifying culture and been amongst the crucify them, as opposed to being in utter solidarity with those who are crucified every day and just struggling to survive, right? These incidents, instead of us sitting back and saying, oh, we ain't like that, or sitting back and saying, how did that happen? It happened, or saying that's not who we are. Well, it's here, so it's clearly who we are. How does it show us who we are? And how does it show us that where we got to go and to go that? At the same time, we always, and I love this as well in my conversation with Alicia Garza, and she talks about it in her book, we forget, and this is another role of who we are to be as faith leaders, etc. We forget, and this reminds us of that. We're going through the world and things are happening in our nation right now, and people are being traumatized and traumatized every day. And some of us live out of experiences that are characterized by trauma. And that's why when you say survive, just that you survive healthy, and the psychologically, spiritually, and physically healthy and mentally healthy, it's like, wow, that's a testament to even get through this week, right? Healthy with all that's going on in our world. And so a part of our response has to always be to ask ourselves, how is this, not simply how do we immediately respond on this sort of structural kind of systemic level, but these are people, these kind of things that happen in society aren't happening just to making a statement to the wind. It's making a statement to people. I think about, for instance, like even COVID and the trauma of losing 500 and some odd million people. And we keep saying numbers, these are people, stories behind this, right? And that means 500 and some thousand families are been traumatized and are in deep pain. We look at things like Dante Wright and Adam Toledo. And these are people, I'm a mom, and I keep thinking, oh my gosh, this is somebody's son. And, and they got a mama. And so I think we have to be reminded, even as it breaks through our walls and, these different symbols of hate, that they are meant to traumatize and terrorize real human beings. And guess what? They do traumatize and terrorize real human beings.
Yeah. I think we should sit with that for just a few seconds because it is very, very just deep and heavy. And thinking about COVID and of all these just other, racism and other pandemics. I remember before COVID, and of course I was able to be at Union just for a few months before COVID hit. And I remember going, to the pit and to different places around campus, and people would congregate and talk and, discuss. And I was talking to Ian earlier, and I was just wondering about you and your time. Of course, you were there twice, to get, of course, you didn't have enough with just one, what's it called, degree, but you needed another one, right? And to experience Union again. And I just wonder, what were you talking about? What were y'all thinking about? What did people talk about at the pit during that time?
Yeah. First of all, yeah, I came in 79 and I just never left because I stayed straight through for my PhD, right? And my intent was to just come for an MA and then get going because I was a psych major before I came to Union. And so I intended to go back and do psychology, and I got trapped at Union. I fell in love with theology, and before I came to Union, I didn't even know what theology was. And here I was trapped, and then doing a PhD in theology. Who would have thunk? And that had so much to do, everything to do with my professors and whom I encountered in the classroom, and falling in love with it. And what I remember about what we were talking about in the pit, yes, all these things that are going on now, unfortunately, were going on then. We were living through the Atlanta child disappearances, Black boys disappearing, if you will recall, Tawana Brawley, all of that. But and that's not a but, like that wasn't important. But what I really look forward to, and this is so true, and I can still remember it, and I see him now sitting there. He's no longer with us. Church historian and patristics, Dick Norris. I see him sitting in the pit with a cigarette and a cup of coffee, and I would love to try to leave for my class early so I could walk through the pit, right? And sit down, and they had donuts. There were always donuts, right? And I was younger then, so I acted like I could eat donuts. I couldn't eat them then, and I shouldn't be eating them now, and I shouldn't have eaten them then. And so I would get my little, never drank coffee, but would get my little donuts, and there would always be students sitting around in the pit, and typically Dick Norris was sitting in there, and we would be sitting in there, and this sounds so geeky or something, but we would really, I remember the battles, the discussions over Christology, and like, really, does the Nicene Creed really matter? And Dick Norris was a patristics guy, right? And so, it mattered to him. It didn't matter to nobody else. But and I'm Episcopalian, he was Episcopalian, so I was trying to weave through, so I wouldn't look so bad as an Episcopalian. But I go like, really, Dr. Norris, really? But we would have this. I remember Union, and I remember saying to somebody about Union that Union is full of intellectual chatter that matters. That was my exact words. And that chatter would happen in the pit. It would, and I always said, you can't move through Union without the intellectual chatter that matters. And that's what I remember. I spent a lot of time in the pit.
That's awesome. That's my new sticker here, intellectual chatter that matters. Yeah, I really enjoy that. I mean, it's because I keep thinking, okay, I don't know if y'all saw the Black Church, right? The documentary, but I love seeing the pictures of you at Union. I like them, you're like, oh, where do they find those pictures? But I mean, they were, it's so cool to see how, you're the dean of EDS at Union now. And yet you were also a part of that, of the Union community and as a student.
Yes.
And I think
And
that's really important.
no, and you know what? And that's why I came back to Union. And in many ways, the Union that I left, and I mean this in a good way, not in the way in which Union stood still and didn't move, didn't grow. The Union that I left is the Union that I came back to, and it's grown. And what's Cornell, and as many of you know, Cornell West will be coming back. And it's like, for he reminded me of the time that we first met, and I was still in college and came up to visit Union for a weekend, and there was a gathering at Dr. Cohn's apartment, and Cornell was there. And you know, when you're young and all of that, you young and no humility and think you know everything. And there was this gathering of Black students in the apartment, and I was a junior at Denison University, and I had the unmitigated gall to get into these major conversations with Cornell and Dr. Cohn, like I was supposed to be in that conversation. And Cornell, of course, Cornell remembered that. I had tried to forget it, and Cornell and I laughed, but it's so great to have him come back. And it feels like, you know, and he and I were exchanging texts and talking about it, sort of coming back full circle. And we both were coming back because this is the Union that we remember. It's not stood still, but it still is the Union that it was committed. We were always connected to what's going on in the world, and that came into the classroom, and it's just full of intellectual chatter that matters. And both Cornell and I were talking about that.
That's so interesting. We don't have a lot of time left, but before we go, I do want to ask you about your upcoming book because I am so excited all about it. So would you just tell us just, you know, a little synopsis of what it is that we have to look forward to?
Yeah, and see, and if it wasn't off to the publishers and I hadn't finished it, this would be a curse and I wouldn't talk about it, but but it is. And so thank you for asking me about it. It's due out in the fall, and it's called Resurrection: Hope, a Future Where Black Lives Will Matter. And it's a book framed around conversations with my son. And it's sort of like Stand Your Ground, that I had no intention of writing it. But in the end, you know, my son was asking questions that led to really, will there ever be a time, he asked me, my son's now 28, will there ever be a time, do you think, that Black lives will matter? And it's a book through my journey from despair to really thinking, nope, to hope, sort of my journey through the cross. But it wasn't an easy journey. And trying to figure out how we can get to a time where Black lives matter. And so that's the book, and it takes you through sort of that journey through conversations. Every chapter is framed by a conversation with my son, trying to really address the questions that he asked.
That's beautiful. Oh my gosh, I can't wait to read because, you know, my son is also
I know.
28 and, you know, just, but, you know, that brought, as you were talking about that in our last couple of minutes, I wonder if you would just, I don't know, you know, what would you tell um, our 28-year-old sons? Because a lot of our students are in that age group, right? Around there, who are struggling today. Uh, you know, a word of hope. What would you tell?
See, I don't want to give away the last part of
Oh, no, no, but like
the
just
epilogue
yeah,
of the book.
yeah.
And some of you heard me talk about this, but here's what I would tell them. That, you know, this is what I know to be true. You know, there was a time that people that looked like me were enslaved, and we no longer are. I cried when I went into the voting booth in 2008 because one, my parents didn't live long enough to see. They died a year before, to see a Black man elected president. My grandparents spent most of their lives not being able to vote. My great grandmother, whom I knew, who was born into slavery, didn't get to vote. They would never, ever have imagined a world in this nation where the fugitive slave law is written into the Constitution, where we could ever have elected a Black president. And this year, a Black South Asian woman? No. My parents, they from their grave, they would say, "You lying." That's what I would tell our sons.
Thank you so
That's
much.
what
And I remember you also said, I know we have to go, Ian, but I know you said, that our people, our ancestors fought for the freedom that they would never see.
Yes,
And
that's what I want. I talk about that, but that's right. They fought for freedom that they would never, that they knew they would never see.
Right.
But they fought for freedom anyhow. And because they fought for that freedom, guess what, Sandra? You and I are here talking about it.
Right. Thank you so much. I know, Ian, you have to get going because they're going to use this room. Thank you so much for being with us. And thank you so much, Dean Kelly Brown Douglas, for speaking with me and answering my questions.
Thank you. And thank you all. Enjoy your weekend.
Thank you.
I'm not sure if we can hear what David Benedict is saying.
He needs to put it in chat. We can't hear him.
Mr. Benedict, can you put it in the chat because we can't hear you?
Oh, you see in chat that he has, will there be a chance to discuss the letter from Black seminarians to the president and board about the April 14th discovery of a noose on campus? So I think, and we can't hear you, but that's probably your question. So I think that's something that hopefully Ian and Sandra, as the day goes on, to make sure that that happens and talk to Rita about.
Thank you. So this room will be used, the next two sessions is a graduate hangouts for the classes of the 1960s and then a graduates hangouts of the classes of the 1970s. So if you check your schedules, and then later on tonight at 6 o'clock, there is a spiritual reflection taking place. So tune into those sessions and have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.